Good morning, world, and hail to the Chiefs. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition, and I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville, North Carolina, the 8th largest state in the United States of America. Before we get into some of the main issues of the day, first of all, as we lead up to the Ukrainian anniversary of the Ukrainian invasion, President Biden is visiting as a surprise visit, and he's also pledged another $500 million in aid to Ukraine. We also begin this President's Day message, praying for the family of former President, the 39th President of the United States, 98-year-old James Earl Carter, Jimmy Carter, who has decided to spend the remaining days on this earth with us in hospice. We have not gotten news of the President's condition, but his grandson has confirmed that he is in the final days of his life. Only Jimmy Carter could battle death and be revered in life, in the final end of life. But we will talk about him as well today. Today, I want to devote my insight on President's Day. After the founding of our nation at a time of kings and queens, the United States of America, our republic, with our first president, George Washington, decided that our leader would be one of us, a citizen of the United States, not a king or queen or a member of royalty. George Washington, when offered the position of king after winning the Revolutionary War, declined and said that the most important office he could ever hold is citizen of the United States. Since that time, there have been 46 members of this exclusive club, the presidents of the United States. All of them have one thing in common. They've recited the same 35-word oath that every president has taken, that they will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of their ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. That oath was taken from Washington all the way to the current president, Biden. We also know that there's only a couple of requirements to be the president. You have to be a citizen of the United States, 35 years of age, and resided in this nation for 14 years prior to running for the White House. All of these candidates, not one woman in the club yet, although that could change with Nikki Haley fighting for the Republican nomination, and of course, Kamala Harris waiting in the wings as vice president if Joe Biden doesn't run. At the end of the day, I'll close out my final insights that this year I was able to go to the White House twice. At the Diwali reception hosted by President Biden and the First Lady, Jill Biden, I could hear the calming words of Franklin Roosevelt as I saw his picture in the White House, helping America rally the Great Depression and leading us in World War II. I could remember the resilience of George Washington as I saw his portrait, could hear the words in my head of what Lincoln's inspiration to save our Union on the Gettysburg Address, when he reminded us that those dead on those fields had not died in vain, and that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall never perish from the earth. Or was it the inspiring words of John F. Kennedy, who asked us that we could dare to go to the moon and that we must serve our nation, asking not what our country can do for us, but what we can do for our country? We remember Nixon resigning. We remember George W. Bush when he, on the ground of 9/11, said, "I hear you, we hear you, the entire world hears you." And in that one instant, politics was put aside and he became the president of all of the United States of America during one of the most horrific attacks in our nation's history. Now we're in the era of Trump, although Trump is no longer in the White House. And Joseph R. Biden serves as the 46th president of the United States, a president who's overcome a lot of adversity and darkness in his life, losing a wife and 2 children, becoming the vice president after being a U.S. senator, and unexpectedly finding himself in the Oval Office, a position that his son, Beau Biden, had always wanted his father to run for. At the end of the day, the presidency is an interesting office. It's a powerful office, but it's one where we've seen leaders of our country lead us through some of the greatest of times, some of the darkest of times. But through it all, we know that within minutes of leaving the office, they transition back to being a private citizen, and the next president comes in. This transfer of power has been something that's been an inspiration to millions around the world who watch the United States of America. And although that has been challenged in recent times, I still believe that it is the pillar and foundation of our republic, and we must all be very proud. Today, we say hail to the chiefs, the presidents of the United States. And today, we have a special guest, along with Mark Lee and my panel, who will be coming and sharing insight. So, Mark, if you bring our special guest in, we want to wish each and every one of you a happy President's Day. We have with us Hal Markovitz, who is an author, has been a journalist. And Hal, welcome to the show. And you have some insight about presidents of the United States.
Yes, I do. Thank you for inviting me on.
No, well, welcome. Well, tell us a little bit about your background, your insights, and what we can do to engage you today on the show.
Well, I spent 30 years of my professional career as a newspaper reporter, and I mostly covered politics. And that kind of gave me an insight into what politicians think and say and do, and sometimes it gets pretty weird. And so it gave me kind of an insight into their thinking. And I left my newspaper in 2006 to write books. And one of the books I wrote is a novel titled Painting the White House. And it's about an ordinary house painter who gets the job of painting the interior rooms of the White House. And once he gets inside, gets his ladders up and his drop cloths down and his paint cans open, he pretty soon finds himself involved in all the kind of weird and kooky intrigues that go on in the White House. So that's what the book is about. And like I said, it's a novel, but I wanted to be very accurate in my descriptions of the interior of the White House. So I read a lot of literature, a lot of sources on exactly what goes on in the White House and what the White House looks like. And pretty soon I started stumbling across some very, very strange and unusual stories about the White House that are actually true. And I was able to weave some of these into the narrative. But, again, the book is a novel, but the stories that I'll be happy to relate to you right now are absolutely true. They all did happen.
Hey, Hal, one of the things, glad to be joining you, glad to have the opportunity to invite you here. But I know that sometimes we think about the unusual counsel that presidents have had. And I know that within the book, there are some unusual stories within that regards. I know that even though I don't think it's in the book, there was talk of, particularly after the assassination attempt, Nancy Reagan turning into astrology and astrologers. And then I do know that within the book, apparently Calvin Coolidge, and I can't really talk bad about it because I actually also in my life at one time had a pet raccoon, but I don't ever remember conferring with the raccoon. But apparently one of our past presidents, Calvin Coolidge, used the raccoon that he conferred with. So I'm thinking maybe he was trying to get advice from the raccoon or whatever, but I'm not sure exactly what kind of conference they were having and all in that space. But that was one of the unusual stories that I saw that I would love to know more about. And there are a couple of other ones that I heard that you have as well. But that one kind of struck my attention. I'm going like, what was going on between Calvin and this raccoon?
Well, President Coolidge would enjoy taking some time off during the day to stroll around the grounds of the White House, enjoy the outdoors, clear his mind, whatever. And at one point, he noticed that there was a raccoon that would kind of follow him when he would do this. Now, understand, he's the president. He's being trailed by a bunch of aides and Secret Service agents and whatever. And he's walking around the grounds of the White House. And as I said, pretty soon he notices that there's this raccoon that seems to always be following him. So he names the raccoon Rebecca. And he actually even had a little house built for the raccoon on the grounds of the White House. And he let Rebecca inside the White House during the day to kind of tramp around the hallways, although they kicked her out at night. But the aides that would trail behind the president would notice that he would actually be talking to the raccoon and kind of, trading ideas and conferring and asking questions. Should I do this? Should I do that? And I don't know whether the raccoon answered him, but it made the president happy, and he probably made some decisions based on his conferences with Rebecca the raccoon.
It makes sense. And I know that you also said, because we are noticing that definitely, as Steve alluded to, that Jimmy Carter is on his last leg here in this earth and everything. Hopefully he will live many more years, but it doesn't seem like that is the case and everything. But that being said, it sounds like you have some stories about Jimmy Carter as well. I know that Steve just shared some, but I'd love to hear your stories about what you learned about Jimmy Carter. I know most people think of him in that sense of being a peanut farmer.
There are a couple of kind of strange Carter stories. One story is that when he became president, of course, he would invite members of Congress over for working breakfasts, working lunches, whatever, and they would sit in the White House dining room and discuss the issues and whatever. What they didn't expect, though, and what had never happened before, was that when they would come over for a breakfast or a lunch with the president, he would bill them for the meal. He billed them $4.75 to have lunch with him in the White House. And so that was kind of a one story about Carter.
Well, yeah, and I worked. There's a picture I just posted on Facebook for those of you who are my Facebook friends of me with President Carter in 1989. I was a young college student. I was a Carter Presidential Fellow or intern, and the only memory I have of him was when he would come in once a month to the Carter Center. He would teach at Emory, so I took a few classes where he lectured, but he was an absolute perfectionist. I remember that if interns made the mistakes of having copies that were double-sided or things that were out of place, they would be immediately terminated, and people would take days off just to get ready when the president would come. There'd be a long line to receive him, and they would be just shaking in their boots. He was a very tough man. Nothing like when I see the images of him. Yeah, he was a generous human being and a good man. But boy, you didn't go from being a farmer to a naval engineer to a state senator to a governor and to a president. At that time, the presidency was really those that were able to rise up to the ranks when there wasn't a lot of money. There was no social media. It was truly the best of America coming on the stage to seek the White House, or at least had come through the system. And I'll always have that memory with me as long as I could live. I remember him getting mad once, and that a university student was arguing with him in a class, and he was teaching on Middle East and foreign policy, and Carter just cut him off, and he said, "Young man, given the fact that I was the president of the United States and I negotiated the Camp David Accords, I think it's fair to say that I know more about Middle Eastern foreign policy than you." And
so, makes a lot of sense. That's a good comeback.
And so, but anyway, but he's the only. I was going to close out with this. I might talk about the end of it, but he was the only president. I think he will be looked upon now by historians as the only president in the United States that really used the ex-presidency or used the presidency as a stepping stone to do more things as an ex-president. So this is a president who, leading the Carter Center, fought for free and fair elections in Haiti, attacked guinea worm disease, joined Habitat for Humanity in building homes for the homeless, was always a voice for human rights through the Southern Hemisphere, Latin America. The late former Robert Pastor, who was a national security advisor of Latin American affairs, was my professor at Emory. I worked for Dr. Pastor at the Carter Center. These were all great things that President Carter did. And I don't see any other former president in that role anymore. Pretty much they stepped back, right? Even Obama, we haven't really seen Obama much out in the public limelight. Maybe that'll change over time. But anyway.
He's popped in definitely on a couple of issues, not as much as Carter. I would agree with you on that. But one thing that I was going to ask Hal was politics, and particularly national politics, something you were always interested in? Because I know that even in my own case, part of the reason of going into journalism was because of Watergate and the interest in Watergate and being an investigative reporter and an investigative journalist and all in that space. And I actually had the pleasure not of ever working with any presidents, even though I did attend and see some presidents in speeches and things of that nature, and definitely on the campaign trail. I think I definitely saw Gary Hart and a couple of the other candidates, including Hillary Clinton. But I did have the pleasure of working and being taught by George Reedy, who was a former press secretary for LBJ. So I was just wondering, that was when I was at Marquette, whether that was something that you were always interested in, this kind of national reporting, presidential reporting, and investigative reporting that became popular during the Watergate era.
I was a college student, a journalism major in the mid 1970s. And of course, Watergate was a big story. And I cannot tell you that it did not influence me. It certainly did. It intrigued me. It made me want to know more, and made me want to know how, reporters, what reporters can do to, unearth these stories. And yes, of course, it had a very big impact on my career.
Yep. Going to bring in some of our other panelists as well. I know that one of them I'm going to bring in is not a big fan of one of the Bushes and all in that space, and that is Sasha Starr. I'm also bringing in Lee Newton Rhodes. But before I get to Sasha, and Sasha may have some questions for you as well, I know one of the stories you tell about George H.W. Bush is that apparently he took a shower with his dog. And I'm going like, that doesn't sound too clean or too anything of that nature, but tell us a little bit about this, and how often did he, I forget the name of that particular dog.
George and Barbara had a dog named Millie.
Yes.
And if you go online or you Google it, you'll see photos of the Bushes with their dog Millie, and they're, on the White House grounds, and they're having fun with their dog, and everything's just, it's such a picture of Americana, how just terrific this relationship is with a couple and their pet, which is fine, and there's nothing wrong with it. But Millie, when George would hop into the shower, Millie would go in with him, and George H.W. Bush and his dog Millie showered together. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, there's no other way to put it. Just really quickly.
And today we're going to keep our guest on. Did he? Oh yeah, he's still on. Let's just go down the row, and we're going to spend most of the show on presidents, and then we're going to end maybe begin tomorrow with talking about the war in Ukraine, the anniversary. Sasha Starr. I think we're going to devote a little bit more of every show. Just now, as we get into the 3 days, we're going to get to the 1 year anniversary of Ukraine. But I want to start with Sasha Starr as an immigrant to Canada from Ukraine. Who are there any presidents that come to mind that are we know who you think the worst president is? I don't want to start one of those again, but let's start with the best. So in the last modern era, since in the last 30, 40 years, who do you like as president? Who should we be talking about?
I think Ronald Reagan probably fits the bill, like the most effective president, great communicator, a man who could really put all creative forces, political forces, I would say, in the US together. And he was the first one who actually proclaimed Soviet Union to be an evil empire. And it was due to Ronald Reagan, very clever picturing the future world war, the Star War, which US was miles away from in reality. But Russian leadership, Soviet leadership, believed it and gave up, actually. That was one primary reason to really subdue the Soviet Union, which was much bigger and much stronger country than today's Russia. And Russia was so weak when the Soviet Union fell apart at the end of 1991. In 1992, at the beginning, they virtually have to scrap together to find $10,000 to pay for a ship of grain ready to depart Rotterdam for St. Petersburg. And they just didn't have $10,000 to pay for port charges, duties, and so on. And that was a time when more astute president than Bush Sr. would definitely provide Russia with all necessary help on the basis of Russia get rid of its nuclear arsenal, and the world would be completely different place than it is today. Because as you know, for 3 generations, people in the West are intimidated by the possible nuclear attack from Soviet Union and now Russia. And that could have been eliminated right at the beginning of 1992 under President George Bush
Yeah, yeah,
Sr.
absolutely. And I did over the weekend. I've been reading about presidential. I'm going to read off my notes real quick, but I do have really quickly. I do have a rating that they came up with of the worst presidents of the United States. The rating. Let me read you the ratings real quick. So the top rated president is Abraham Lincoln at number one. The worst rated was James Buchanan, one of the worst. Franklin Harding, Herbert Hoover.
I'm sorry, Steve. What criteria are they using?
I don't know. I'll have to go back and look. It was basically in the rankings were just based on the time that they lived in, basic national research polling. Past presidents who have been out of office longer, what they found, their legacies actually improve over time. So President Obama has moved up considerably, and now Andrew Johnson has dropped to 15. So, and then I think it's just that different factors that were involved. But the often joke is that two of the worst were Buchanan, and after Buchanan you had number one Lincoln. Or in the ranking, and then after Herbert Hoover, who was one of the worst presidents, you had Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was in the Oval Office the longest. So kind of interesting. But let's go to, before we get back to our historian, just a quick word from Dan Worthington, our more conservative analyst. But in terms of your thoughts of presidents we should be talking about that come to mind on President's Day.
First of all, I think anyone who serves in the office of the President of the United States should have our appreciation and thanks, no matter which party or political affiliation. It's a very difficult job, and it requires lots of sacrifice to do. There are presidents for whom I have very little disregard. And, this isn't a day to point out who they are. I think I have a lot of respect for Ronald Reagan, like Sasha does. No, they all have their strengths. They all have their weaknesses. I just read an article about Biden is interesting, and that one of the reasons he wants to run is because he thinks basically the rest of his party is crazy, and he thinks he's the only real moderate choice. Kind of interesting because of the alternatives, Buttigieg and Warner and a couple of the other wackos that would be the alternatives to him in running for the Democratic side. And it's just, so you got to have an appreciation for the strengths and weaknesses of all the leaders of the free world who have served their country. And so I'm not going to disparage any of them, really. I have at times commented on my opinion of the current president, who I think has been fairly ineffective. But considering the choices of the Democratic Party, who do you got, right? So that's kind of the problem we have a real dearth of leadership in our country today who have both leadership capacities and the political abilities to become president and to provide effective leadership. Because as Trump discovered, it isn't the same as running a business. There are so many things that the president has to deal with, and so many things going on behind the scenes the president doesn't have any control over. That is a kind of rude awakening. Anyone that gets in the seat of power. That's why you saw Obama kind of open his eyes wide once he discovered what was going on, really, and moderated some of his positions. He had to, because of the reality of what a president has to deal with. It's very interesting.
Hey, Dan, in that same line, and I don't know whether Hal would agree with me, but I would argue that and I'm not saying that you're not right, that if the Democrats have been hijacked by the left and everything in that nature, I can say that in some ways the Republicans with Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of those other forces have been hijacked by the far right. So I think that both parties have some work to be done.
Oh, we live in the day of wackos. There's no question about that, that of extremes. But guess who created those extremes? The media and the rest of us idiots that voted for him, right?
Yeah, and there's so many different. That's why when I did my monologue, and today as a surprise edition, I do have a witness here, but I'm going to do my best to recite all 46 presidents by heart with no notes. I may have to have my son come down and just say, "Look," but I'm going to do this today at the end of the show, Mark Lee, and all I ask is that you take that clip and send it to me so I can share it. But yes,
yeah,
I'll
definitely do that and everything.
Yeah, so we're going to do that at the end of the show. But let's go back to Lee Norton Rhodes, and then we're going to get back to our guest about other things we should be thinking about. Lee, any presidents that come to mind?
Yeah, there is. But first, I want to pick up on something you said before about President Carter, the uniqueness of him, that once he left office, he still cared dearly about this country. And I think that cannot be overstated. It's a shame that others don't do that. One of the biggest problems I think we're having nowadays is the tearing apart the fabric of the United States, the sides, left and right, conservatives, liberals, whether it's part of it's the media and part of it's our politicians. And I admire Abraham Lincoln, what he tried to do to this country and what he did do after the Civil War to bring the North and the South together, regardless of what he thought about people and what they did to the country. The tremendous amount of healing that he helped this country to accomplish. And it's a shame that we don't have politicians like him doing that nowadays. We have politicians now, as elections have consequences, get over it, it's my way or the highway. And that's not Abraham Lincoln. And we need to bring that back.
Hey, Lee, just really quickly, one of the presidents that I admire personally, and yeah, they had their drama, they had things to go into their life, there's no doubt about it. But in terms of being a unifier and definitely dealing with a lot of turbulence at that particular time, I'm actually an admirer of Kennedy. I think Kennedy did a lot of great work, whether it was some of the things that he founded that were in the social justice lane and the things of that space, or whether some of the initiatives that he did in that space, and definitely did a lot of work along with LBJ in the civil
Mark,
rights.
I think Kennedy did two great things in my mind. One is I think he made patriotism cool.
Yes.
And the other one is responsibility towards the country. He brought that out.
Yes, and that's one of the things he did. I would also say that another one that I admired, they had some New Deal packages, some of those that we still use to this day, and some of them that have been corrupted and all in that space. But I am an admirer of FDR. And I'm also an admirer, as many of you have said, of Jimmy Carter. And, just because he was a first, just like Steve's going to be our first Indian president, there were some things that were admirable about Obama, and even the whole kind of ways that he was trying to bring the nation together, because he had to find a campaign and a campaign slogan that was going to be not just addressing one segment of society, but it would be resonating with a lot of folks, because otherwise he wouldn't have not he would not have gotten elected. So he did have to find something that was resonated. And I do agree with, I think it was Dan said that he had his eyes open when he came in because he was a grassroots organizer. I have friends, and I consider myself a grassroots organizer. So yeah, I think he came in from that lane of grassroots organizing and was expecting he was going to be able to bring some of that into the White House, and that is not always the case. There's a lot of political maneuvering.
I want Hal Markowitz to jump in, but what's interesting is the last few presidents that we've had never really planned to be the president. It really wasn't their ultimate goal. Even if you go back to George W. Bush, it really wasn't his plan to be the president. If you look at Barack Obama, I don't think he ever saw it coming. You look at Trump, I think when he first ran, he probably didn't even realize he was going to win. That was a bit of a surprise. And then Joe Biden, when he left the vice presidency, I think really thought he was going to be out of public office. And 8 years later, came back in, or 4 years, there was a break, and then he came back in and became the president. So you had Bill Clinton, who I think always wanted to be president, but circumstances enabled him to come in and win a tough election at that time against George H.W. Bush. Reagan, don't know whether he really was he was an actor, then a governor, but I don't know if that was his lifelong goal to be president of the United States. And so, who knows? Maybe it's Al Gore. His whole life was to become president, and then it wasn't able to happen for him. So all these people want to be president, but it's something that comes upon. But any other interesting stories you have for us, Hal, about any president?
Hey, along those lines, I was actually going to ask about one of those because, oftentimes we hear of press conferences, and I alluded to it earlier and everything, but I don't know that there has ever been a press conference about a basic human activity. I mean, we all have to do it, whether we want to admit it or not, but it's part of our human basis and everything. We all have to go eliminate stuff, and I'll just leave it at that kind of note and everything. But apparently there was a press conference that Dwight Eisenhower had because he had to move his bowels. This I really got to hear. So why there is a press conference for moving your bowels?
Actually, that was Eisenhower suffered a heart attack while he was president, and he was hospitalized in Walter Reed Army Hospital. And at some point, they had daily press conferences to update the media on the president's health, and he did recover, of course. But during one of these daily press conferences, his physicians disclosed to the White House press corps that the president had successfully moved his bowels that day, which upset the president a bit when he heard about that.
And speaking of that, apparently Lyndon Johnson had diverticulosis, and he was always constipated and literally would go days and weeks without going to the bathroom. So it was just miserable for him. And so
I'm sure it was
you hear
miserable.
these stories about
Now we know why he was so full of it.
Now we know. Hey,
There was a
it's uncomfortable. It's when you don't go to the bathroom for a few days. It's just not, how do you run the
Bowels
country?
not move.
I did not come across that particular fact about Johnson, but I do know this, that he when he moved into the Oval Office, he would use the toilet. There's a private bathroom in the Oval Office, and he would use the toilet with the door open. And so if somebody unexpectedly came into the Oval Office to talk to him, it was not unusual to see Johnson sitting on the commode. And it was fine with Johnson. He would just carry on the conversation and tell them.
They had that in a few of the movies, even the movie Selma. He's talking to his advisors, and it's so unusual,
He was a Texan after all.
Yeah, he was.
He also had a phone installed in the White House bathroom so he could take calls while he was in there.
But that's also, as we're going to spend a few more minutes and
Probably
maybe
helped him relax.
It probably definitely helped him
what's
relax.
amazing-
Hey, speaking of relaxing and everything, I did have one other story, well, two more that I wanted to get to from Hal. But because one of them places that one of these presidents went swimming, and of course it was an early president. I don't know that anybody's going to try to swim in that water now, and that's due Potomac River. I mean, it'd be like swimming in the Hudson in my mind for the New Yorkers and those that are associated with New York and the Northeast and all that. But apparently James Monroe used to enjoy swimming nude in the Potomac. And I don't know that anybody's going to try to swim in the Potomac now, because it's probably like anything else. It's got a lot of stuff in it that we might be
Well,
taking our life in our own hands.
I suspect back then it was a lot cleaner than it is now, but you're correct. James Monroe would take some time off from his busy schedule and traipse down to the river and take off his clothes and jump in for a swim. One time he was a reporter, a journalist who happened to have been a woman, which was very rare in those days, found out about this habit, and she followed him down to the river and watched him strip and jump into the river. And at that point, she sat down on his clothes and told him he couldn't have them back unless he gave her an interview. What did he do? He gave her the interview.
That's one way to get an exclusive, but
It's called rebuffed. He was rebuffed.
he was rebuffed totally. Speaking of rebuffed and interviews, apparently the first lady, this is one of the other story that I saw that you had put out there and everything. Florence Harding gave press interviews in her negligee. I'm thinking, like, I don't know what Florence looked like or anything in that space, but that would be an unusual way to have a press interview. But I'd love to hear more about this story as well.
Right. Florence Harding was very, very comfortable talking with the press, and she would often invite them up to the living quarters, and sometimes she never bothered to get dressed, and she would be in her nightgown and would lie down in bed and answer the questions. She also consulted, I believe you mentioned before, Nancy Reagan consulted an astrologer.
Yes.
So did Florence Harding, and she used to have a weekly session with a fortune teller who she would send the White House limousines for, and the fortune teller would come into the White House and sit down and talk things over with the First Lady. And the fortune teller did tell Florence Harding that her husband would die in office, and he did.
Well, I see we've been joined by Jatovi. Jatovi's with us, and of course, Jatovi's always got amazing things going on out of that gaming world and everything. But Jatovi, it's a President's Day edition, so I was seeing if you had any presidents that you admired, and if you had any questions for Hal, who is a fellow journalist and also somewhat of a trivia historian of the various presidents out there. So maybe there's some president that you want to know about that Hal might have some ideas about as well.
I mean, well, I guess since it is, that it is President's Day, but also since it is sad news with Jimmy Carter's, declining health, I guess it'd be kind of neat to hear some things about him, about Jimmy Carter himself, something that isn't well known.
Well, I shared Jatovi the fact I put it up on my Facebook site, but I worked with Jimmy Carter at college as a Carter Center at Emory University presidential intern my sophomore and junior year, and I didn't work for him directly. But the one thing about him that to this day I was only like a 19-year-old kid was he was just a tough man. I mean, he would make people cry when copies were double-sided and they should be single-sided. I remember when Oscar Arias came in, the prime minister of Costa Rica, and there was just people fired that were just making mistakes. And the rule is when the president came in there, you'd have to take 2 days off of class to make sure that you got everything right. Because if you got one thing wrong, he would make sure you were fired. He wasn't this harmless kind of guy, and so he was feared. I mean, I remember people shaking when he would come in, and some of the professors would take 3 days off before he would come in. So anyway, that's just something interesting. The point is, he's a good man, but I think he was a really hardcore driven person who, dotted every I and crossed every T. And I think that's the way he lived his life. I don't think he had a good presidency, obviously, but, I think a very successful ex-presidency, but, lots of people working for him, and he made a big difference in the world. So.
Hey, Hal, just out of curiosity, are there any unusual facts that you have about Obama and Trump? I know that those can be two polarizing presidents.
As far as President Obama is concerned, I didn't find much. He was not the funniest guy who ever lived in the White House. There are, of course, a couple of funny Trump stories. The funny one that I found, the funniest one that I found is the White House actually has 3 floors. The first floor is, where all the tourists go, and the West Wing is on the first floor, and the East Wing is where the First Lady's offices are. The second floor is an apartment, and it's where the president and his family live. And there is actually a third floor, which is just a few rooms, a bedroom, a couple of other rooms. During the Obama presidency, Michelle Obama's mother lived on the third floor. So the president's mother-in-law lived up there. When the Trumps moved in, the First Lady, Melania Trump, discovered this third floor. Now, it hasn't been unusual over the years for presidents and first ladies not to share bedrooms. The president's a busy guy, gets phone calls all hours of the night. The first lady just wants to have a good night's sleep. So there have been, over the years, many presidents and first ladies who have preferred to sleep in different bedrooms. Melania Trump discovered the third floor bedroom, and he decided that's where she was going to live in the White House. So the Trumps not only did not share the same bedroom in the White House, they didn't even share the same floor.
Interesting.
Hey, Kim, we're talking about President's Day. I see that you've joined us along with the other boss of the network, Nick. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts about President's Day. And of course, we've got our special guest, the journalist Hal, who has joined us and has definitely got some interesting stories and has written an amazing book about the person that painted the White House. And it's a novel and all in that space. But I definitely am glad to have him as our special guest. But I'm also glad to have the bosses around. So any thoughts on the president?
I'll let Nick start.
Oh, if I put you on charge on that.
Okay, we'll put me on the chart.
Okay,
being a president is a very serious responsibility. And I always say they are there to serve us. And I want to thank all the presidents in the past and today. Whether I liked what you did or not, I respect you, because you took on a great responsibility to help build a better America. So we should celebrate this day because it's a very important day for all the presidents that we have had in our past, today, in the present, and for our future. Happy President's Day.
It's a great day. And the history of the President's Day, it's really around George Washington's birthday. So that's why they selected the February 20th week. I think his birthday is on February 22nd. And it's a day just for America, federal holiday. But, I use it as a day to learn about presidents. Today, I'll be ending the show doing all 46 by heart. So do the drum roll, and I'll have a witness here. But I'm also going to be recording it on my phone. And I have no teleprompter on Pod or Roku TV. So when I speak, usually I'm speaking right into the camera. I tried to start doing my monologue without my phone, which is easier because now I'm looking straight at you. But
Steve, I've got a very important question for you and everything, which is that we know that you are going to be the first Indian president of the United States and all of that. So we want to know, every last one of us here, what our positions will be on your cabinet, since we know that you're going to get this office and you're going to get this job. So I need to know what positions we're all having. I understand that Toby's going to be in head of gaming. There's going to be a new office. So the cabinet of gaming and all in that. Sasha's going to handle foreign affairs and all in those lines. But I need to know from you right now, what positions are we getting?
I did find a role model in the governor of Maryland, who actually he was in the military, but he was a city council member who got into journalism and media, and now he's the youngest governor. He's only 44 governor. I can't remember his name, but that made me inspired. Hey, maybe I'm not going to run against Josh Stein, maybe after Josh, and then become governor, and from governor go to the White House, right?
Well, you really need to serve in the military for a little
Yeah,
bit.
I know it's too late. I do regret, Dan, that
No,
I
it's
never
not.
served in
It's
the
not too
military.
late for you. Should
I
have done
know
something.
it is. I think I don't think I'm too old now. I'm 51.
The guard? No, you're not. You're under 50, aren't you?
No. I'm
Oh, he's
51.
over 50.
Yeah.
But
Oh, I thought you were just a young buck.
Question for everybody on the panel that actually you brought up earlier, but and I know that it is one of the requirements that you be a citizen and all of that, but there is also the age requirement, and we've seen a bunch of older presidents over the last several years. Whoever wins this time is going to be probably in the 80s range. Well, if Nikki wins, they'd be in the 50s, but there have been a number of presidents that are older. Is there any possibility, and how maybe you know this, of them ever lowering and or changing the age restrictions? I'm not saying that I'm for that, but there's also been talk of that, and also making the election a federal holiday. So any thoughts about either of those being
Well,
able to
I
happen?
I think part of the reason presidents are living longer is that, and just in general in America, even if you look at the courts, is healthcare is keeping us alive longer. I mean, you think about the founding of this country, even living to 50, 55 was a long life. But now it's very common to live till 75, 80. We could take our exercise, we could take our supplements or vitamins. Dan Worthington, thank you for making my day saying I look younger than 51. But I work out as a former athlete every day, probably as hard as I did when I was in my 30s. So hopefully that's keeping me younger so that whatever I do, I can live longer. And that's everybody. I mean, and so I just think that eventually we'll have to have younger presidents because these older ones are just going to die out. And then
Sooner or later, they got to die.
yeah, if you're 75, 80, eventually you're going to have a time. But in terms of federal holiday, I'm for it. I think we have a day off would encourage more voting. And I think
Hey,
regardless.
now, Steve, if Kamala gets elected, then you won't be the first Indian.
But she's half Indian, half African American. But Nikki Haley, which I'm going to mention that in my closeout today, but that's a truly amazing situation in that she is the daughter of Indian American immigrants, Sikhs, who went to South Carolina. And it really says a lot about the fact that, she's now a serious contender for the nomination of the party. She may not win, but the fact is she's got the street cred, the credentials to be in the Oval Office. And so
Sure.
I think for many Indian Americans, regardless of whether we're Democrat or independent, it is a sense of pride. And I think I'm a moderate Democrat, but I got to tell you, I'm very proud of Nikki Haley. And I think that I think it's absolutely wonderful that she's put herself in a position to seek the highest office in the land. And when I was a kid growing up, there was no way. If you had told me that an Indian American woman, the daughter of immigrants, would have a chance to be considered for the president, I would think you were crazy. But I think most people around you would have thought that, right? So it just shows
Steve,
you
what does
how
it
far
say about the state of America being a racist country?
I don't know whether it's just, it's, I mean, my statement had nothing to do with about racism. It's just that you just didn't think that someone like that of our heritage would become a president.
Oh,
Basically, most Americans don't give a damn about a person's skin color.
No, it's true.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I mean, but she's got a good record. I think, but anyway.
Hey,
Mark,
tell me,
that's my
what is
answer.
your thoughts on that? Because definitely we had that first African American president in the sense of Obama, and there is this notion that that is an aspiration that people have talked about in high school and even older years about their aspirations of being president, and that anybody can be a president, and that has definitely changed the narrative of Obama, and now maybe Nikki has changed the narrative, but there are still roadblocks to that from some of the communities that exist. But what are your thoughts on that, Jito?
So the problem is that once President Obama was elected, people wanted to move past the idea that racism was still alive in America. People wanted to say that America still did not, this proves that there is no race, or that we've moved so far past racism, it doesn't even matter anymore. Well, that's untrue, and sadly it is. It's still alive and well in the U.S. That's based on statistics. I mean, heck, Nikki Haley, yes, it's amazing that, of her background. I don't like her policies, but I am happy that due to her background, she's made it to this point. However, she's polling at roughly about 2%. She's not going to truthfully have a chance. And even Ann Coulter has come out and already said, go back to your country. So,
Oh, that's bad.
That's bad.
And that's crazy because she's an American and just like me, American citizen, and But
Who's Ann Coulter?
This is what we are still.
Why are we listening to Ann Coulter? Who the heck is she?
We're not.
Well, guys, Mark, go ahead and begin the countdown because I think
I don't listen to Ann Coulter. I don't know.
We're going to wind down everything, but I hear what Jacoby's saying and everything. The only other thing that I was going to add to what Jacoby just said, and some people may think that it's a great idea, some people may think that it is stating the obvious. I actually talked to a friend of mine. They're like, that's stating the obvious. But I think it was over the weekend that President Biden actually made an executive order that was talking about the fact that systematic racism existed, kind of to what Jacoby is talking about as well. And he made a executive order just acknowledging the fact that it was out there. And then when I mentioned that to some friends of mine, they were like, that's like stating something that we already know. So one of the executive orders that trying to figure out why the executive order was made, since it's a known fact that there is.
Just to touch on that as well, if you look at what the GOP policies are being pushed out right now from Ron DeSantis to others, Greg Abbott and all, about these banning books and basically fighting against quote-unquote CRT when they don't even know what CRT is, quote-unquote wokeism, which they use the terminology, which they don't even know what that term is. Basically, they're Black history, and they're banning these books that are around Black history, as well as the LGBTQIA community. They're banning those books. They're also taking away a lot of women's rights and so on and so forth. So to say, again, it is great. We've made progress, but a lot of what's happening right now, we're starting to regress in some things that we should be aware of and be cognizant of, because we cannot get out there and say, "Hey, we're the home of the free, the land of the brave, and the home of the free," and then turn around and ban books that we're afraid that our kids may see when we're the parents supposed to be educating them. Yep.
Mr. Tovey, I agree with you. The book burners had never been on the good side of history, but there are those who wanted to ban Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. Pornography also does not belong in public school. So some books are clearly not appropriate for public school.
That's a false premise. There's no pornography in public school. We cannot put out there false information saying, well, there's Playboy in elementary schools or they're teaching CRT in elementary schools. That's just not true. That's just not true.
Tom Sawyer, that was banned from a lot of schools.
Pornography. Now, don't say that Tom Sawyer's pornography, because it's not.
I didn't say that. I said there's Tom Sawyer, which is banned. And also, I'm asking you a question. Is pornography appropriate for public schools? You're going to agree. No. So if there is, that should be censored. Or do you agree?
You're better than this. Now, you're just stating something saying, oh, well, pornography is in elementary schools. Is it really? No, it's not. So why are we having a discussion around that?
Because there are
because it is a good
meetings, the parents presented it.
It's not
when
in
you're
there.
doing comparisons of what we censor,
The Bible itself
we
should
need
be
to make
banned.
sure that we censor.
Oh, yeah, that's right, Jacoby.
The
All right,
Bible
guys, are we ready for my rendition of the
That gives us your point of view.
disagree
You just
that the
lost
Bible
all
itself, that
credibility
everything
with
that
me,
you're
buddy.
complaining about being banned, the Bible talks about stoning people. The Bible talks about murder. The Bible talks about, incest. I mean, the Bible has these things in here that you're complaining that it should.
I asked why we haven't banned the Bible. I asked why we have not censored the Bible because of the books we have censored. I have all of
What
that.
it is, man.
But you know what? The Bible is not allowed in public schools.
Hey, hold
The
on.
Bible is not allowed in public schools anymore.
No, hold on one second.
That's
Hold
not
on.
true
I think Sart
necessarily.
had a quick point that he wanted to make, if he can
Yes,
make
the
it
question
quickly and
is, who
everything.
makes these
And then I want to hear Hal's, just since he's our special guest, if he has any closing thoughts. And then I definitely got to get to Steve. So we're going to do this very quickly. So, Sasha, quickly. I know I'm putting pressure on people.
Very quickly, speaking about pornography, I remember the Playboy magazine that I read at the time had fantastic interview with Steve Martin when he revealed a lot
Great
of
articles. Huh?
interesting things, and it was
That's what they
exclusive
always
to
say.
Playboy. So if you didn't read this number of Playboy, you would never seen this fantastic interview. Now, speaking about Nikki Haley, she has no chance. There will be no U.S. woman president for next 375 years. And one of the reasons is U.S. has to impose a very aggressive and strong posture, which cannot be projected by women, number one. Number two, I remember the episode with French President Sarkozy when he went to Moscow to settle the conflict between Russia and Georgia. And they were talking about, and then Putin came close to him and he squeezed his hand so much, his hand was almost broken, and all he could think of is to run to the airport and board the first plane back to France. So politics could be also very physical. And in that case, men have a tremendous advantage. Even people like Donald Trump.
All right, guys.
Hey,
Mark,
just
are we
really
ready?
quickly, if Hal has final words, and I'm gonna turn it over to you, and we can go a couple minutes over. But Hal, any final thoughts? I'm gonna try to put up your book banner really quickly as well. But I did have you as the special guest. I'd love to hear your final thoughts, just in general. You heard the lively part of the discussion, which I told you it can go to sometimes. So,
Can I finish with just a funny story about the White House? Would anyone
Please.
mind?
please.
Yes, that's great.
Okay, the White House was designed way back in the 1790s by an architect named James Hoban. And Hoban wanted to get this job right. He took it very seriously. And so when construction began on Pennsylvania Avenue, he had a cottage built on the White House grounds, and he moved into the cottage so he could oversee the construction 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And things were going very well, and he was very satisfied with how the construction of the White House was going. And at some point, he decided he didn't have to live there anymore, so he moved out. So he leased the cottage to a carpenter named Donahue and his wife, Betsy. So Betsy Donahue and her husband moved into the cottage. And it didn't take long, but it was discovered very shortly thereafter that Betsy Donahue was running a brothel out of the cottage. So the Donahues were kicked out, but it just shows you that the original use of the White House grounds was not what it is today.
Well,
Like,
are you
There you go,
sure?
folks.
Are you sure?
I am absolutely sure. Yes.
Okay, good. That's
There
good.
might be some questions about that. Steve, I'm gonna drop everybody off and give you the final word on all those presidents and all of that. Hal, I'm
Here
glad
we
that
go.
you were
We've
able
got,
to join.
first of
I hope
all,
you'll
I just
come back
want to,
later
this
as
is my
well. But
phone,
you're
and I'm
drop everybody off.
videoing this. We might go a few minutes over.
Yes.
I am live on Roku, and I'm going to go all 46 presidents by heart. If I miss one or two, please give me a grace. Mark, send me the clip at the end. This is streaming also on my video, which I'll share on Facebook. So we want to thank all the presidents. Hail to the chiefs, from George Washington to the current day. And may we wish them well in whatever they do leading the United States of America, our republic. Here we are, the presidents of the United States. George Washington, and here are my notes. I'm putting them right here. George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, and Benjamin Harrison. Grover Cleveland held the presidency twice, two terms, one in between he was not the president. William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Warren G. Harding, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard M. Nixon, Gerald R. Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, George Walker Bush, Barack Obama, Donald J. Trump, Joseph R. Biden. Those are the 46 presidents of the United States. Hope I did okay, Mark, but we did it. Want to thank you all for being with us today on this President's Day edition, and we look forward to seeing each of you tomorrow, where we're going to talk about Ukraine, the anniversary. We're going to talk about aid to Ukraine and other things going on in the world. Also, one of the water reservoirs is down in the west near Arizona. We're going to talk about that as well. From our family to yours, be safe. Happy President's Day to all. God bless each of you. Thank you.